All right, now we're officially broadcasting. Welcome, participants. We'll get started in just a minute. Hey, Rob. Hey, Tom, do you have an idea of the crossover from this morning?
I'm looking now. So far, none.
There you are. Hey, Rob.
Hey, how are you?
Hey, Rob.
Hey, Tom.
Rob, good afternoon or good morning for you.
Well, hey, Greg. How are you? Yeah, for like 10 more seconds, morning.
That beard is getting bushy.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. The experiment is exactly, you know, where it's going gray and how fast it grows.
You're growing hair and I'm cutting it off.
I know. I'm looking at my shears and my clippers, saying, "Is it time for me to attack?"
So I just got tired of it getting longer, and I said to my daughter, I said, you know, honey, you got shears, and she's, yep. I said, let's go out in the driveway.
Let's do it.
We went out there, and she just started trimming, and I said, just. And of course, all these cars are coming by beeping. Hey, can you know, are you for hire? You know, it's kind of funny.
Right.
It looks like the gang's here. Hey, Chris. Hey, Ollie.
Hello.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. All right. I think we have everyone. So, Tom, if you're okay, we'll go ahead and get started.
Yeah, let's. We're recording. So, let's go.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the All Hazards Consortium's webinar from an operational standpoint about the CRA tool, or Commercial Routing Assistance Tool. My name is Laura Johnson. I'm the Director of Conferences and Events for the All Hazards Consortium. Some administrative remarks before we get started today. This webinar is being conducted by the AHC, which is a 501c3 formed in 2005, whose goal is to build public-private operational partnerships with industry and government. And today we're working in partnership with DHS, CISA, and Idaho National Lab. We are recording this webinar, and the link will be made available if you want to share this with any of your coworkers or peers. And also, open source information will be discussed, nothing sensitive. The tool we're going to talk about today meets the DHS process and policy requirements and was approved for public release on May 5th of this year, and press releases were issued. Also, you've all been muted upon entry. We have a Q&A box in Zoom. If you have any questions or chats along the way, feel free to type them right in there. We'll get to them at the end of the call. And thanks for all being here today. Tom, I'd like to turn things over to you.
Okay, thank you, Laura, and thank everybody for attending. Very excited to have this webinar today. We're doing 3 of them, actually. One we did this morning on the strategy behind this new technology and capability. Today is we're focusing on the operational use and how this is being approached. And then next Wednesday, we'll talk about the technology, right? The data, the technology, the algorithms, things that go behind it. There's a lot of stories behind this. So I'm really glad today we've got our partners from DHS, Idaho National Labs, and Ben Ear on the phone, and we're all part of the development of that, along with the All Hazards Consortium and the SICE work group. There is a one-pager. We attached it to the invite that you can look at, developed by INL and DHS, and there's also a link posted right there at cra.inl.gov. INL can give you some stats on that. It's had a lot of hits right now. And it's been a really unique effort that has merged kind of data collection and vetting and aggregation, and then how to operationalize it. So on our next slide, we tried to illustrate two things happened for coronavirus. One was a Esri hub page was established very quickly by a number of partners, I guess somewhere around 12 to 15 different organizations working together. I won't name them all because I'll forget them, but there's a lot of them out there. And so this hub, it kind of came a place for information, but it wasn't just information, it was vetted. We were actually vetting to make sure that information is right based on the size and how it works. So it was collecting that. Well, all of a sudden, our partners at INL, Rob and Ollie and Michael and Tim and Mary said, you know, let's put this into an app. So literally 6 days later, they took this vetted information, wrote the algorithm, built the tool, which is very fast. That's hundreds of documents in a second. It's amazing. And produced a routing tool that was really innovative. And that's the commercial routing assistance tool. One of the best parts of it was trying to come up with a name for the tool. We had all kinds of acronyms that some we couldn't say publicly. It was quite an effort. So today you're going to hear about the operational use, and I'm really glad to have everybody on board. And I know it's a Friday, and it's beautiful out here, so I know people are getting webinar fatigue, but we are recording this. We'll use this for future training and things like that. So thank you all for joining. Thanks to our panelists. Laura, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So I'd like to introduce the four panelists. It is Friday that we have today. First, we have Greg McShane from CISA, Ollie Gagnon from Idaho National Lab. Say hello to Chris McIntosh with Bent Ear Solutions, and we also have Rob Edsel from Idaho National Lab. So I usually move forward to our first question, but I'm going to stick on this slide for a minute because we have a great core team here that worked on the CRE tool. So if you could just take a minute to introduce yourself, and we'll go in order here. So Greg, if you could say hello and your involvement in this tool.
Sure. Thanks, Laura. Hi, folks. Greg McShane. I support a lot of the technical facilities for the Integrated Operations Division, including the CISA Watch operations, Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. You know, that dives into a lot of the regional operations, our planning and readiness folks on those fronts. But anything IT, software related, build out that public-private sector partnership where we support on the IT end falls right into my strike zone.
And Greg, what's your background? Give people a little bit of your background.
I'm a civil engineer by trade. You know, I picked up you know, some finance experience and degrees along the way, and a lot of I worked for Pepco for about 6-7 years, designing and building substations. Worked in a lot of the operations and maintenance, doing a lot of privatization and outsourcing, and then joined DHS about 13 years ago, and really work in the client end, if you want to call it that. I'm kind of that IT pusher or facilities pusher, getting CISA what they need on those types of projects and fronts.
Great, thank you.
Okay, hey, Ollie, are you being shy with your video?
Oh, is it not on?
It's not on. Well, that's okay. We can hear you great. If you want to just introduce yourself.
Yeah, let me do that, then I'll turn it on.
All right.
Ollie Gagnon with Idaho National Lab as the Chief Strategy Relation Manager. My role is the primary liaison from the National Homeland Security Director within INL to DHS CISA. I work a lot of different direct projects such as Aviation Cyber Initiative, 5G security analysis, and leadership development, and get involved with a few other projects related to CISA. As far as my background is, I did 23 years in the Air Force, mainly in the security forces. Had a couple of years after that with the Defense Threat Reduction Agency doing critical infrastructure all over the world. Spent 14 years in DHS, which is now CISA, as one of the field persons, and I was involved with a lot of tool development, working with the national labs to bring to the organization over the years. And I joined Idaho National Lab in June 2018.
All right. Thanks, Ollie. Hey, Chris, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us your involvement with the CRA tool? Uh-oh, can't hear you.
Let's come back.
Okay, we'll come back to you, Chris. Let's go with.
He has too many microphones.
He'll figure it out. He's a nice. There you go.
Hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Former Navy enlisted in officer, and I was the operations chief at the Virginia Emergency Operations Center, and I was also the public safety director at Esri. So at Ventir, we use the knowledge of operations and emergency management, and the knowledge of what can be done with the GIS and the tools and technologies that are available, and bring those together to try and help people get the most out of what they can do with geospatial technologies in an operations center environment. And working on this was awesome with this team, because we got to do that very, very quickly and make a real difference. So appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks so much, Chris. And last but not least, Dr. Edsel.
Hey, Rob Edsel here. I am a critical infrastructure analyst. By training, I'm a geographer, and that's what I have my degree in. And I was, for about 15 years, a professor of geography at various universities, Arizona State, University of Minnesota, and others. And I joined the lab about 5 years ago to help them with their geospatial research and GIS and cartography and data visualization efforts. And a lot of the design stuff that you'll see in the CRA tool comes from our team that I've been leading. So it's great to be here, and great to kind of have a project that has such a great societal and direct impact, and like Chris said, something that came together awfully quickly when you have the right people together. So
True. Thanks,
happy to be
Bob.
here.
Thank you. Okay, so we just have 4 quick questions for today's webinar, again, dealing with the operational aspect of the CRA tool. Question number 1 is if you can describe the operational challenges that were occurring out there that led to the development of a new transportation data app. Not sure who to direct this one to first, but Rob, since you're unmuted, do you want to give it a go?
Sure. Well, I think, a lot of the audience probably knows exactly the kind of challenges that the transportation industry was facing. But, kind of as we were talking with DHS and with All Hazards Consortium and their transportation working group, we discovered that there was a real problem in the trucking industry early on. This was back in, mid to late March, that trucks were encountering resistance as they were going across the country, not just because of COVID, but because of the varying levels of responses and varying landscape of resistances, of declarations, of closures, of restrictions as you cross state boundaries. And so these were kind of state-to-state variations. As soon as you go from, in our case, from Idaho to Utah, if you're a trucker, you may encounter a whole different set of curfews or of restaurant restrictions and closures and rest stop closures. And we determined wasn't a good one-stop shop for truckers to go and understand all of these potential problems in just their day-to-day routing kind of applications. So if a dispatcher needed to send a shipment from Los Angeles to North Carolina, what are the kinds of things that you'd encounter along the way, and is it possible to reroute your trucks to encounter less of that resistance? Yeah. So that's the kind of challenges that we were trying to respond to. That was the use case that was developed by AHC and by some of the folks here at INL and DHS, and that turned around into an application that we developed. So that's my point of view. I'm sure others have some comments about that.
Laura, let me give those that aren't familiar a perspective. Normally, when you have a hurricane or ice storm in the Northeast or wildfires in California, normally you'll have 3, 4, 5, 6 states declare emergencies and issue a couple of documents, right? 2 or 3, maybe 4. In this pandemic, we had every state issue at least 25 documents: waivers, declarations, closures, delays, commercial driver's license information, we've never seen it like. So the complexity was 100 times what it normally is. It's usually just a region of 4, 5, 6 states. This was the whole country. So it created a really complex environment. And just to give folks that aren't familiar, when you go from, 4 or 5 states with 3 documents each, 50 states with 30 plus documents each, you can see the complexity for the driver was like, oh my God, I'm gonna get arrested. I gotta shelter 14 days here if I go in that state. Greg McShane's got a great story I want him to tell using the tool about that. But anyway, I just wanted to share with the listeners the magnitude of the complexity, and we've never seen it before.
Chris, I'm going to ask you the same question. I mean, you've spent your career in dealing with these issues. Where did you see the gaps and, kind of jumped in to solve this issue?
Yeah, there's 2 sides to it. There's the side that was mentioned before, the complexity of the operational environment for the trucking industry, because there were so many orders coming out so fast, and states were all at different levels on how they were restricting movements, kind of out of sequence and keeping up with all that. So if you're trying to get your critical goods from one place to another, how do you do that? It wasn't, most of the time we deal with things that are more regional. A hurricane might be a half dozen states and it's kind of manageable, but this was a whole nother scale. So that's the operational side. The data side, normally statistics and experience show that when a crisis happens, there's about a 400% increase in available data. Everybody who wouldn't share data before now wants to share their data. So we're inundated with data. So you have to figure out what data you're going to use. Is it authoritative? Is it reputable? And get it in the right format to do what you need to do with it. So there was also that side of it. Where are we going to get or create the data to solve the operational problem when there's a million websites that are popping up all over the place, each with a piece of the answer? So those 2 things were the things that we had to jump on really quickly. And fortunately, we were able as a group to kind of figure those 2 out.
Okay, thanks so much, Chris. And Greg, from a federal perspective, and anything to add?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the great things we love working with the All Hazards Consortium is really the looking at it from an operational perspective. What's the operational problem that we're trying to solve? We've always taken in early discussions some of the use case type approach. And one of the discussions early on was kind of the mutual assistance with power companies. If you're a host power company in Florida, you get hit by a hurricane, how do I get some of those mutual assistances in place in a fast, effective, efficient manner, getting folks from Canada, from Long Island, New Jersey, North Carolina down there to help out. And it's a use case that we've been trying to challenge. We've even come up with, areas of pre-staging. But when I saw the original ask from, as a result of COVID-19 from our leadership was, we want to try to minimize any impact to commercial assistance and transportation. It's all that emergency support function number 14. It's the sector, cross-sector, dependency, interdependency. And one of the areas was in transportation. How do I get from point A to point B as part of the supply chain and not let it break? But Tom mentioned a story early on. It was about 7 weeks ago when we really had capability that when we pulled in INL to develop this tool, we really wanted to see if this was going to work and test it. And when we first started kind of rolling it out and testing it, I actually had to go up and pick up my mom in New York City. And, when we started thinking about how do I do that, this app was like, wow, we can do this. Let me roll it through the app. And, can I get through this Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey? And it turned out that my brother was able to pick up my mom in New York City, get to the city. We met in Delaware. I was able to stop at the rest stop, and actually, the facilities were actually open. You looked that over on the trucking side. Is the trucking open, and where are they going? And could you get food? Could you get gas? Those types of things were all easily answered with some of the assistance of the tool. So. It was a great news story, success, and we're looking to how best we can build off of this capability in the future.
Thanks so much. Your mom's a superstar.
Yes, she is.
All right. So next we'll move on to the innovation of the tool. And Ollie, I'm going to direct this one to you. How was the CRA tool developed? And if you can tell us a little bit how it works. And then we're going to move after question number 2 to Rob to do a quick demo for our listeners.
Okay, so how this came about, it was, I should probably say from an operational perspective that it wasn't like the All Hazard Consortium, INL, and CISA did not know each other already. So I think a big piece of, as Chris pointed out, you know, the data was there over a length of time to develop that data sources. There was already a working relationship on some other projects, and everyone had their specific roles. But the key to that is, in order to go operational, you have to have a really defined operational outcome. So based on those relationships already being in place and previous projects, what happened is it was an email that was sent out by Associate Director Wilkinson from CISA, and he sent it to me and saying, hey, can we help in this effort? Obviously, there's a whole string in the email. Went back internally to the development teams. Is this something we can challenge, we can overcome? And the answer was yes. And then, of course, that started the initial meeting the next day. And 6 days later, after really kind of sketching out what this would look like based on the data sources and making it user-friendly, and have some, you know, operational implications through a capability, what you're going to see now with Dr. Edsel is going to demo for you is what was the result of that. I would say probably 95% of what you're going to see was done in 6 days. Obviously, there was some minor tweaking if we had time to update a couple things or move something around, but it was pretty much, you know, the requirement was laid out early and the capability was developed to about a 95% solution within about 6 days. I will say that we're looking at the analytics of this, and it's been out about a week now, and we've had over 3,500 users pretty much across the country. So with that, probably a good time for a demo of what it does.
Yeah, I agree. So Rob, if you're ready, I'm going to stop my screen share. Let's show people what this can do.
All right, hold on just a second. I'll get it nice and set up here for you. Make sure that yep, good, that'll work. All right, so I get to share my screen. I can maximize, hold on. All right, good. And screen 1, share. Thanks for your patience on that. All right, are we seeing what okay, good, cool. So, like Ollie just said, we put together a website, really. We sometimes call it an app, and sometimes that's a little confusing because people think they can download it onto their phone, and it's like a little thing that, you know, sits on along with, you know, your, I don't know, Scrabble, Words with Friends app or something like that. No, this is actually a website that actually works just fine on mobile devices. That's one of the things that we created, you know, with the capability. It's responsive to iPads and to iPhones and, you know, mobile phones and various things. And you're looking at it right now through Google Chrome. We call it the Commercial Routing Assistance application. Again, INL, Idaho National Lab, and DHS are the main developers of this. We put this together as for several tabs across the top here: an overview, a map, a state information, detailed information, and summary information. I'll go through each one of these very, very briefly. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time, but this gives you just the overall look of what the current state of affairs is. This is data that's being brought in primarily from the National Governors Association. They have a good vetted data set that we can, of most of this information that we're pulling in with a few other sources as well. But the National Governors Associations, you know, for example, we have 50 states and I think 6 territories involved here. What we'll do here is develop a route from point A to point B. see what kinds of options there are for that route. And of course, we can customize that route too if we want to make a special stop at Greg McShane's mom's house or something like that. And then we'll see what kinds of restrictions there are from state to state that would be relevant for decision making for a dispatcher. So we actually are borrowing a license from Bing Maps. This is a fairly familiar interface here to have a routing tool. So I'm going to just start with Los Angeles, California as our point A. And like I mentioned a little earlier, I said, I think I said North Carolina. So I'll say Wilmington, North Carolina, like that. And this is your familiar routing option. So we would say, okay, well, most of the time you'd take I-10 across Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas, and all the way over to Wilmington, North Carolina. But there are other options, of course. You could take I-40 through Albuquerque and Oklahoma City, or go north, the northern route up on I-70 and across through Nashville. Let's say we are interested in this southern route, the one that was recommended by Bing Maps. And we'll take a look at the state information. And this is the thing that we developed sort of custom for this tool. This is a map that's a little bit more generalized than you might have seen in GIS or in other applications, where essentially we've simplified it so that it connects the states, but doesn't give you a lot of detail about the design of about the shape of the states. But things like DC and Connecticut and Rhode Island are kind of highlighted as, kind of important things that you can see. Maybe Montana and Alaska and some of the bigger states are a little bit smaller, just so that because really this matters only by, sort of state boundaries make that much of a difference. So we kind of took that as a design task to just give people exactly what they needed and not any more or less. The information that's on here right now is about trucking variables, commercial driver's license expirations, extensions, increased size, weight limits, medical grace periods, the closures of rest areas, for example. I'm going to go right down, turn off all of those, and just see right now which states have potentially some closures of their rest areas. Well, it turns out looks like it's in the highly affected areas of Michigan, Illinois, Pennsylvania, and Massachusetts, and there will be no problems with rest stop closures along the southern route, the I-10 route that we've selected. And you can see that those are the highlighted states here in black. But there might be some other things, let's say increased size weight limits. Well, no problems there either, but that involves some other states that might not have lifted those restrictions on weight limits. As we get into more things, what we've done is sort of mixed the paints here in red, yellow, and green. We're beginning to see some potential restrictions to the route here with the SDLA closures as that's affecting our southern route, but really not so much. Looks like Arkansas is our least resistant state of the list right here on the map, and Wisconsin is the most resistant, at least based on the things that we've selected. We can choose government actions too, which is interesting. It gives us a whole bunch of other things: extension of individual income tax, primary elections having happened or not, National Guard activation, emergency declarations, and of course, emergency declarations may or may not have influenced the trucking industry, but it might be interesting to know as you're a dispatcher. So these are some, you can make your own choices here of the things that are of interest to you, curfews, and it changes the color of the map. It's some background analytics that we're doing that basically give these things different weights according to how important they are to the trucking industry. And so that is, and we have this thing down here, we call this the subway map representation. It basically looks like, several, maybe you're more familiar with it in terms of like traffic jams. And you have green means no resistance, yellow means some resistance, and red means a little bit more resistance. And along the route. If you wanted to, by the way, you could go back and change the route. Let's see what happens if we take a look at the northern route. And you'll see that the the northern route is mapped here differently, and you can see that there are state boundaries make some resistance changes there as you go from Illinois to Kentucky, for example. So that's stuff that you might be interested in knowing. Let's stay with this route here just to see what the detailed information looks like. This detailed information we can export as a Excel spreadsheet. Basically gives you more details about what each one of the variables is saying about each one of the states. So Colorado, for example, has online-only SDLA closures. It has state employee travel restrictions. It has closures of non-essential businesses and so on, which might influence what restaurants you stop at as you're trucking across the country. And then we have the summary information that basically is a visual representation, more of a graphic representation of the restrictions along that route. So of the 11 states that route passes through, 8 of them have increased size and weight limits, and 3 of them have not increased the size and weight limits. So these are the sorts of, we think, decisions that a dispatcher or a trucker might need to make in a short amount of time. There are, I'm sure, other kinds of information and the data sets that as we're rolling this out, we're hearing from people who are using it to say, wouldn't it be nice to have X, Y, and Z data sets on this? And this is great, but we don't really care so much about school closures. Why don't we put on some more Department of Transportation hotline numbers or more information that might be relevant. So this is, it's flexible. It's really quite lightweight in terms of an application, in terms of the development of it, and is pretty adaptable to new data sets and new kind of requirements and requests that come in as people are using it. I think that covers all of the demo from my point of view, unless other people have things that they want to show off that I missed. But
so Rob, I have a question. If
sure.
people do have questions or suggestions for the tool, how is that being funneled? Is that an inquiry form here on the website?
There isn't an inquiry. There's no feedback form right now on the website, although that is something that we had looked at adding, and it certainly should be. I think the contact information that you'll get from this webinar will probably be the right people. I mean, basically, I'm one of the designers. Ollie's our coordinator at INL, and Greg and Tom are also great people to contact about specific changes to this. But right now, it's just sort of getting Q&A from webinars like this, and getting requests, and this is a good way to do it right now.
Great. All right. I'd like to grab back the screen, Rob.
You bet. Stop share.
And go back to the questions here. All right. So we did the demo. So now I want to talk to the users and the process. So you talked a little bit about the process, Rob, but tell us a little bit more, and you mentioned this, but who is using this tool? Have you heard from anybody that has used the tool yet? And then Chris, we'll move to you for the next 2 questions. Rob, if you want to start with the first.
Oh, I beg your pardon.
That's okay. Or Ollie or whoever.
No. I'm certainly happy to. This is the first. I did say I was going to say this. The first question is, we are designing this for people who are looking for that one-stop shop of decision-making tools that we had in mind a sort of a 30-second decision. They needed to make a quick decision. They were, sending a bunch of trucks out. They're dispatchers, they're truckers who just needed kind of quick response, summary information. So that's why we kept things kind of simple in terms of the interface. We don't think it's a particularly steep learning curve to understand what's being shown. And so, we are hoping that it's useful to basically your dispatchers and the folks that are determining which direction trucks should go and what states they should or should not pass through.
All right, Rob, thanks a lot.
Yeah, I would, Laura, I would add on to that and say that, from the beginning, the design principle was it should be for the individual trucker all the way up to a major company or disaster agency that's trying to move, critical supplies. So it could be for a small business owner, it could be for a dispatch center. And the other design principle was it had to be able to use in a mobile format and obviously in a desktop format to accommodate the users. As far as feedback, I mentioned who's been using, but being out over a little over a week, one of the first bits of feedback we got on the CISA Twitter account was a lady that was not a driver, was not in transportation, actually in the technology field, but her dad has been was a truck driver for 35 years, and she was so excited to show him this application and what's being rolled out there as a great advancement in information.
All right, great. All right, Ollie, thanks for that. Hey, Chris, we're going to move to you. If you could talk a little bit more about the data aspects of this tool.
Sure. As I mentioned, when we got started, there was a lot of data all over the place, so we had to find some authoritative sources. And we found that the National Governors Association and the American Trucking Association were out actively collecting this type of data and providing it in spreadsheets to a lot of people. So when we first you had the need to create data out of those spreadsheets, and at first that was a manual process, and it was being done on the SICE COVID-19 Esri Hub site that Tom mentioned at the very beginning, where we were manually taking every day an update of that data and updating the data services from that. So many thanks to the National Governors Association, the ATA, for doing that work and pulling it into one place. The National Governors Association is now, thankfully, actually populating it as their own data service. So the data is coming from the National Governors Association to the Esri Hub and then to the application. The Trucking Association is still being updated in the hub manually, and that is going to the application as well. So there's always a human in the loop of both these data sets, making sure that they're valid and verified, and something weird doesn't happen, because we're in this world now with connected services, and sometimes something can be changed, such as the National Governors Association has continually added things that they're tracking to their data schema. Because we're in there every day looking at it manually, we're able to leverage those additions to create new web maps or new capabilities in the CRA, and also make sure that they don't do something that breaks something downstream. So there's a combination of manual processes pulling from the NGA and ATA, consolidating that in the COVID hub, and then providing that to the INL team to populate what you saw in the routing assistance tool. That's really been groundbreaking is too strong of a word, but it's really been the way that a good illustration of the way that process has to work, regardless of the hazard. Get the data from sources, get it right, and get it into something that's an authoritative source or authoritative application that can use it to answer a specific question. And I think that's really what you see when you bring all of this together and build a tool like this. So,
hey, Chris, let me just add to that, because early on when we were developing the tool, we were actually collecting a lot of this information. I ran into probably 3 different folks or entities within CISA that were collecting the same information. And once we started kind of discussing the design of the tool and how we implement that, it really matured into, hey, wow, guess what? You know what? Esri Hub is collecting this information from NGA, and now we actually have an authoritative data source coming into the Esri Hub that we could feed into our tool, which is like 2 of the parts of the recipe, along with the right people, the foresight, as well as, again, the advanced technology, as well as the authoritative data source that really kind of provided that right mix to make this tool really work.
And working on the interoperability of the data and getting it in interoperable formats was a huge part of that. It doesn't get enough credit, but working with Rob and Ollie and their team, what they needed, so that we got data out of a non-interoperable format into an interoperable format so it can be used for multiple applications. And it can't be, I don't want to minimize how important that part of the process is.
Okay, thanks, guys. Oh my goodness, is that it? Oh, I skipped one. Okay, future uses. Operationally, how can this tool be used in the future for both government and industry? I mean, we talked about the disasters, but just anything you could think about where this can go as it grows. So Greg, I'm going to start with you on this one.
Yeah, so one of the areas, and I kind of briefly mentioned it, is ESF 14. It's all that sector, cross-sector, dependency, interdependency. Once you start kind of, understanding how this kind of plays into, food delivery, bringing the supply chain of food to the markets is really a key element. And that's just one example of how we can expand the tool. But just simply right off the bat, it's just identifying some additional data sources, whether, it's, again, going from point A to point B. What else would a trucker want to know? Maybe a waiting line information on each gas station, so he can actually go to the one with the shortest line if he can make it to that next gas station. Where can I get food? It's a lot of those simple ones right off the bat. Medical care, medical help, tying it into some of the other capabilities we're working on within the SICE, PPE, those types of things. I think once we kind of understand the tool, how it fits together with some of the other tools in our tool belt, and how do we integrate those tools, I think would be a really great start to build on the success of this CRA tool.
Thanks a lot, Greg. Hey, Ali, did you want to add anything to where you see this going?
Yeah, I would say, as Greg pointed out, there's already a lot of outreach as far as the next version, data sources, and a lot came up even in the 6-day process to develop it. But I'd say that one of the evolutions that needs to come is, one thing about COVID-19 is really the first time we had a truly impacts across the entire country at once.
Yeah, sure.
Even though major hurricanes, you may have fuel outages in the Northeast based on something in the Gulf Coast. But the next challenge is going to be is get that data down to more of a county and local level. Mm-hmm. So if you have a hurricane that strikes, Florida, and you're trying to move goods from, say, staging area in the Pensacola Panhandle to Miami, what are the route resistance that's happening from Pensacola down to Miami? Like yesterday, we had I-75 in Alligator Alley. That 20 miles it was closed with a wildfire. That will not be reflected in a tool today, but that's something that would be of great value. So getting down to the more micro data for regional impacts will be important.
Thanks, Ali. Rob, anything to add?
The question a little earlier about feedback on this on the tool actually leads me to the think about the ways that crowdsourced data can get into this tool. We've talked about that as a potential future use of this data, where you would, as Greg mentioned, where are there lines at a gas station? Well, that's probably best provided by people who are actually rolling along the highways and who have that information firsthand and can upload and update our information. If they're using the CRA, they might say, oh, well, actually this road is closed, or this bridge is now open, or this, the gas is actually, flowing here, and you had indicated that it wasn't. So, getting crowdsourced information vetted and, kind of from trusted users would be a great improvement here. So I think there's always going to be a push to get the best and most complete and most useful data for the various uses that we're finding people who are actually out there using the tool. And that'll always be a priority for us.
Okay, thanks, Rob. And Chris, any last comments here?
Those are all great. The only thing I would add is I'm interested in exploring the use of this tool to specific scenarios. we've talked about hurricane, but there's also more micro scenarios, wildfire, earthquake, that's going to create requirements for different types of data. As we continue to dig into this, just how does this tool apply to different types of incidents that it may be employed in, and what are the nuances between those?
Okay. All right. Great. Thanks, guys. All right. So I'd like to thank all of our panelists today, Greg, Ali, Chris, and Rob, not only for being here, but for your collaboration, your innovation, and your dedication to the tool. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. We're going to ask our panelists to stick around for any questions that the listeners may have. You can type in a question in your Q&A or even in the chat. And actually we just got one. So let me go ahead and read that out. Okay, we have a question here. When you, Rob, I'm gonna pass this to you. When you open the legend on the state information map, there are colors that do not have a label. How do you interpret the colors?
Good question. Okay, I probably can. Can I share my screen? Do you mind, Laura, if I?
Yeah, go for it. Let me hit stop
Okay.
share. Yeah, there you go.
Right. Yeah, great question, because we are, as you can imagine, if you look at I'll flip to the detailed information, there's no, it's not like a temperature like Fahrenheit scale where colder is obviously like lower numbers and hotter is higher numbers. Some of these take a little bit of kind of interpretation to know what is a good thing and what's a bad thing. It limits on gatherings, for example. What is good for a trucker and what's bad for a trucker. Certainly face coverings, you might say, if you're required to have a face covering, that would be a more restrictive rule than if you're not. But we had to kind of go through each one of these and say, the colors are, are red if there is no increase in a weight limit. Okay, well, you can't haul more things in one shipment, so that we consider a little less of, a little bit more restrictive than if there have been waivers or regulation changes that have favored the trucking industry, where that kind of changes that from red to green. So we do have a legend down here. It might not have shown up in the demo that I had for each one of the colors. For SDLA closures and so on, the things that are shown here have the actual labels there of what they mean in terms of the colors.
Okay, Rob.
And Laura, one other thing to add to that is this is like it was initial kind of waiting behind it. But normally what happens with these now, this is a very short time developing, is we will now get with the SMEs in the transportation sector, and then you would actually want to do data elicitation to give weighting to each of these factors. Does weighting is a bigger factor than a CDL extension, for example? So that will be part of the next phase.
Okay, thanks, Ali. Another question, we talked about end users. We talked about how not only is this commercially, but can be used personally. Are there any groups who cannot or are not eligible to leverage this tool?
Anyone can access it.
Anyone?
Yeah, it's open. Yep, it's unrestricted at this point.
Thank you so much.
Now, Laura, there is talk about as the data sources evolve, as you start getting different data sources, there is potential of a sensitive area where you have to be vetted, but the stuff that's in there now is not considered sensitive.
Okay, thank you. Hey, Tom, those were the only questions we received. Did you have any closing remarks or questions for the audience?
No, I think we're anxious to get feedback from everyone. Ali mentioned about 3,500 users of it now. We were monitoring this. I have a call with a couple of associations I think next week, to look at getting feedback from them. I think it's a work in progress, as long as everybody understands this, right? It's like a painting that's never done, where you're always touching it up. And I think this opens the door for many other use cases to come together. Pretty much everybody needs roads. So there's a lot of potential here. So I want to thank all of you on the webinar, and those who aren't. There's many who are not on the webinar, partners who contributed the data, you know, Healthcare Ready, National Governors Association, State Council of Governments, the ISACs, you know, our private sector fleet response work group, our state liaison committee, the SICE work group. There's been so many people who have their brush on the canvas here. It's really hard to name them all. But it's just the beginning. We're very happy to bring this. And of course, Laura, you're going to mention the webinar we have coming up next week that'll focus on the technical side of this, which is really fascinating how all this kind of came together. So no, I'm very pleased. Thank you all to our panelists and those of you who joined by phone. Go ahead, Laura.
Sure. And before I talk about that webinar, Tom, we just got another last minute question from Keith. Are the actual waivers and emergency declarations included in the app?
No, not. I believe it's just the summary information is included in the app. So if you were, I'm just guessing that Keith's question would be that you might actually have a link from the detailed information page to the actual. Let me just double check. Yeah, you know, I'm not. In some cases, they are. Some of the detailed information does have, and I've forgotten this, hyperlinks to the relevant documents on the websites of the various states. So there's a link here from one to the Kansas Department of Transportation's webpage with the various data that you can access. So not directly, but yes.
All right. Thanks a lot, Rob. Okay,
Yeah.
and so as we mentioned, we have part 3 of a discussion about the app on May 20th at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's going to be another Zoom call to talk about the technical aspects. So we invite you to join that and hear from the brilliant minds that put this, that created this app. And Tom, I believe you'll send out invitations to everyone on our list.
Yes. Yeah.
Wonderful. And the last thing I just want to show you guys is my email address. So if you have any questions for the All Hazards Consortium or even for our panelists, I can get your additional questions, suggestions, solutions to them. So feel free to write that down. And that's all we have for today. So thank you so much for joining us. And this ends our webinar.
Thanks,
you,
everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend.